That was an interesting effect. Anyway, welcome to tonight's show, folks. Didn't exactly get time to put in an awful lot of preparation for this because the topic sort of came up as part of a discussion yesterday. And this is about the housing crisis in Idaho and what our options are, some of the things that we can do moving forward, looking at what we can do from a libertarian perspective, particularly with the way that a number of things happened here in the state of Idaho regarding housing. Okay. A lot of you remember that we have a federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. During the Trump era, this was actually run by a brain surgeon of all things. I mean, why you'd put a brain surgeon in charge of housing and urban development is beyond me. But Ben Carson, they sent him in to do that. Um, yeah, probably not one of the best decisions. But the thing is the Trump administration really didn't give a damn, did he? So where I'm at today, folks, is where I'm at. Enjoy. Uh, so what we're looking at from the perspective of what's going on with the housing right now. Used to be a situation back in the day when we had a housing crisis. There was an organization, it was the Public Housing Authority. Now, this public housing authority was basically able to operate and run low income housing that was owned by the city, owned by the state, owned by the county, in some capacity, because it was public housing. And they were able to provide low income housing for people across the United States, which was owned and managed locally. Now, around oh god, this was Clinton, so this would have been 90s, late 90s. The idea of public housing reached a crisis. And there were several areas like Detroit, among others, where the local housing authority was actually corrupt and it didn't maintain the public housing authority the way it was supposed to. Most of it was just a means of funneling money into donors' hands. You had slumlords like Trump, among others, who saw this as an opportunity during the Clinton era. And there was a bill that was actually passed and signed into law under Clinton that basically terminated the ability of the housing authorities to continue to exist in the way and build for future need with regards to public housing in the United States. Now, some of us grew up now in areas, got a lot of friends who grew up in the public housing projects, Canyon County Housing Authority, uh, the Boise City Ada County Housing Authority is another one. It's actually one of those that's still in fairly good standing. It has over 200, I believe, housing projects, apartments, complexes that it still owns and manages, which is unique in a lot of ways. Reason one is because it wasn't immediately privatized and sold back over to private industry. It was still owned by the city. It is still owned and managed by the city. Canyon County Housing Authority right now is actually going through a process of privatizing all of their housing authority buildings and selling off the properties, turning it over to private management, or just selling the properties and allowing new property managers to come in and do with the property what they want, such as tear it down and put up new housing. So now that's one of those things that is happening across the United States. Here in Idaho, it has a particular effect. Reason why is because our housing authority, the Boise City, well, let me get this right. It is the ACBCHA, the Ada County Boise City Housing Authority. Okay, and the 200 that they run here in the city currently well occupied. Um, in Idaho, this project was actually fairly well ran. Most of the housing authority complexes were relatively safe. They were able to provide housing for the people who did low income work, uh, helped with an awful lot of the immigration housing issues that would come in. People, immigrant workers would come in, set up, get set up in the housing. So in a lot of ways, that did fairly good here in the state of Idaho. Uh, those housing complexes weren't considered dangerous. Again, like I said, Clinton went in and said, you know what? Public housing, it's got such a bad vibe to it. Um, the housing authorities across the United States, there is now a federal law that the housing authorities cannot expand their practice. They cannot build more public housing. And during Obama, yeah, Obama of all things, Obama was the one who signed into law that allowed the privatization of all of that public housing. And what that comes down to is none of that's really a libertarian solution. Okay. This is state facilitated. This is community facilitated. In Idaho, this is Boise City facilitated housing. City taxes, city property taxes would pay for the acquisition, the building, and then in turn the rental, so that the city was the property manager. The city rented to the low income people. And to a certain degree, it was subsidized through the taxes. But this was land owned, it was rentals owned by the city, and the city collected the rent on them, which means the city could set the price. And in turn, if the price was fair, the city would profit off of managing these properties. Yeah, imagine that. Private industry watching the city make profit off of renting property. You can understand why that got the kibosh put on it back in, 90s and 2000 with Obama and, or 2008 with Obama. Can't be having the public actually be able to pay for the services they created. Saw the same thing with the Tennessee Valley Authority. Remember that when we went in and we created all those dams and created all of that energy that we sent out through the Ozarks into Tennessee so that all of these communities had power that private industry refused to help get into those communities. Same thing. We have laws in the United States that prevent the government from going into competition with private industry. Unfortunately, that's one of those things where we also run into the same problem that private industry, if they don't want to do something, they have a means of preventing collective organizations like a city or a county government from going in and answering a public need that the private industry doesn't want to actually see answered. Got it? I'm a libertarian. Talking that solution isn't what you're here for tonight, though, is it? You want to hear what the libertarian solution is moving forward. Well, housing here in the Treasure Valley, it's reached a crisis point. Yeah, give me a minute here. Um, do not disturb. Okay, it's reached a crisis point because we've seen an awful lot of people moving here to Idaho. We have a lot of out of state money that has increased the value of the property here in the state, such that property prices are currently pricing us out of the ability of low income residents of the state of Idaho to actually own housing. And we've created a situation in Boise where the managed property, the zoning is preventing the building of new facilities in order to accommodate the people coming into the valley in order to make sure that everybody has affordable housing. Okay. The market's going to crash, folks. There are people who are telling me it won't. Unfortunately, this is one of those things where the value of the property that people are currently paying for it is unsustainable. It is well above the median. It is well above what can be afforded by the median income in the state, even when it comes to taxes. Property taxes, yeah, property tax. Let's go ahead and talk about Moyle's idea of, let's not give everybody a property tax break. Let's not give everybody a sales tax break. But let's continue to make it easier for, let's continue to relieve the tax burden on Idaho's wealthiest, who already have a lower tax burden than the people who clean their houses. Yeah. Um, One of the things is property's building up too fast and they're not allowing us to build up. Part of that is because the construction process here in the valley, it changes as you build up. 2 and 3-story buildings can be built out of 2x4s. They can be built out of wood. They're fairly cheap, easy to create, easy to manage, which is why you see an awful lot of these 2 and 3-story townhomes going up, even 4-story. A lot of the construction that's going on now in some of the locations is 4-story. And reasons why it's 2, 3, 4-story is because building codes allow you to use these less expensive, more easily managed building products in order to create that. So you have a ceiling of 3 or 4 stories when you're looking at building up. Once you go higher than that, the construction requirements change. You need more steel, you need more concrete. This changes the cost of building the buildings. It also changes the cost of going in and doing the inspections. It changes the cost of the regulations associated with it. So we're looking at, well, how high can we build up now that we've built out as far as we can? And what's that going to cost? So we're back to the issue of building codes, building inspections. Do we have qualified people to go in and build the facilities that we're looking at, like in the 1970s when we built high-rise apartment complexes out of concrete and steel, with windows? And whether or not our city fathers find the aesthetic of those particular buildings appropriate for Boise. And we continue to see that problem pop up time and time again. I've been around the world. I've been to Hawaii. I've been to New York. I've been, to other countries around the world. Some of the high-rise apartment complexes, yeah, the aesthetic is not always pretty, especially when you're looking at low-income, high-rise construction. You end up, yeah, Korea. That one's actually an interesting place because some of the much older buildings, you see the facade on them start to crumble. You see um, buildings lean. Yeah, when you see a 7-foot story concrete series of concrete apartments and one of them starts to lean, you know, that's not going to end well. Again, this is about what the cost is associated with going in and actually doing these within regulation, being able to create the number of apartment complexes, being able to create a sense of ownership in an apartment complex so that people can own their homes in perpetuity rather than this perpetual rent thing that seems to be becoming the stand to as out of state organizations, land management, property management. They call it property management. That's such a bad term, folks. It's land management. They come in, they manage what is built on the land. In a lot of those cases, land management, it's land grab companies, but they are managing the land. They are creating these apartment complexes to generate perpetual revenue, usually on the backs of people who are not making nearly enough in order to continue to pay rent if they've been given the opportunity to own a home. So let's talk about solutions that are out there that for some reason still seem to be denied. And we got collective ownership. Okay. We've seen it happen in other states already. We have seen cooperatives go in and buy out property owners, gone in and said, no, the renters of this property have first purchase right if these properties are going to be sold, so that the owners can go in and say collectively, we are going to apply for the loan. We are going to buy the property. We, as a cooperative, are going to continue to pay the mortgage on the property and buy the owner out. Now, this is an interesting solution. Reason why is because it creates a sense of ownership. The residents who were previously renters now own the property collectively. It is now their community. And they essentially all become board members in a corporation that they rent from them, and they rent their property from themselves. So the money turns around and gets invested directly back into the community. If there's a surplus, they can improve on the property. So this is an option that's out there. It does exist. Um, Accessory dwelling units. Right now, one of the things that we have a problem with in Boise is Boise City has said no. You cannot live in an RV in the driveway of a property you own, or you can't rent that spot in your driveway for an RV on a property you own. And this is one of those things we've seen in a couple locations, where the kid, you know, he doesn't want to live in his parents' house, but he can't exactly afford to live on his own. He can afford enough to pick up, you know, 1970s era RV and park it in, mom and dad's driveway. He lives in the RV. It's a little bit different than living in the basement, but not every family has a basement to stick the kid in when the kid turns 18 that has a independent, door so he's not walking through mom and dad's house in the process of going and doing whatever he's doing. The thing is it's illegal to live in an RV in your mom's driveway. Why? So auxiliary dwelling units, like the RV, like a tiny home on a property that is owned by a property owner. You know, my uncle used to live in a double wide over on a portion of my grandmother's property. You know, now it was zoned in such a way where he could do that. It was enough property that he could get away with doing that. Whereas these days, we have an awful lot of parents that are living on a quarter acre, half acre, and there just isn't that kind of space to put it back behind the house. People actually have to live on the driveway. Libertarian solution. Let them live in the driveway. Okay. Another thing, multi-generational housing. Let's talk about that. Following World War II, the concept of multi-generational housing actually died out. You had the 1950s, you had Happy Days, you had, Ron Howard. This idea that, you know, there was only one generation that lived within a house. Okay. And mind you, this was interesting. Reason why is because at the same time we were watching Happy Days, where we were watching, Ron Howard, and Richie Cunningham. Yeah, Richie Cunningham. Sister Joni, the Fawns living in the studio apartment up above the garage, you know, renting. Um, During this entire era, one of the things that was going on, who remembers the Walton family? Yeah, you remember the Waltons, right? The Walton family. This was the old timing, where you had four generations living in the same house. You had Grandpa Walton, you had Dad Walton, you had John Boy, and eventually John Boy and his, wife, brothers and sisters, they had their kids. You had four generations, multi-generational housing. Okay, we phased that out. Reason why is because the banks had a product they wanted to sell. They wanted to sell houses. So they needed people to buy houses. We created propaganda system that said, you know what, you should not be living in a multi-generational house. You are part of a nuclear family. The nuclear family belongs, you know, you know, mom, dad, the kids should be able to pick up, move anywhere in the United States and be able to operate independently. We know better. We know that doesn't actually work. Picking up a nuclear family, mom, dad, two and a half kids, and transplanting them somewhere else in the United States without adequate support network is usually a recipe for disaster. As we saw, during the heyday of the nuclear family concept, we were looking at something like, what was it? 40% of the households were actually nuclear families. And home ownership is a dream, and there's nothing wrong with home ownership. The idea that you need to own your own home rather than working and improving upon a family or a multi-generational home was probably one of the biggest boondoggles the bankers ever convinced post-World War II veterans to participate in. So multi-generational homes, the old farm home, the idea that you could actually set up a place. Okay, yeah, now some of you guys are looking, yeah, but that's how you end up with the Duggars. The Duggars. How many of you remember the Duggars before that stuff went south, right? Um, Take a look at the Duggars. They live in a multi-generational house. Okay. Now, Dad Duggar, you didn't have Grandpa Duggar, but you had Dad Duggar and you had their kids. And eventually their kids had kids, and they were all living in this absolutely massive farmhouse, 20 plus bedrooms because of how many kids they had. Maud Duggar was popping out a kid every 9 months, sometimes twins even. Um, you know, but despite everything that went down with that, which, yeah, my feelings about evangelicals, um, that was one of those concepts that allows an extended family concept to continue to exist and live and support the family in such a way. Yeah, Josh should have gone long time ago. Um, when you're not dealing with that kind of uncle in the household, extended situations where that continues to develop and it's not addressed. You have that support network in the family. You have the ability of brothers and sisters to assist with raising the children. You're living in the same house. Mom and dad, grandma and grandpa can help you raise your children while you work, while you contribute. And you're living in a house where your children have access to an adult who can teach them, help with homework, help with housing situations, help with teaching them chores, teach them how to be sustainable, you know, and independent of society at large. Multi-generational housing is definitely a concept, and it's something that we can look at bringing back. Another thing that's out there, and I talked about collective housing before, the idea of using a collective housing scenario or a collective organization to go in and buy, land in large enough quantity where multiple families can participate in the community, where they have a central house for community gatherings, where they still have their own individual housing, and they have enough property to create, in a sense, their own sustainable community with um, gardens, supplement food. These are intentional communities. Now, this works more when you start getting rural because you want the ability to have land you can plant. You want to be able to run the farm. You want to be able to have chickens, and you want to have this mutual support network that's going on in much the same way of an extended family. But this is you create or own. Now, there are some other options. There is actually an intentional community. I believe it's down in Dallas right now. And what they've done is they've gone in and they now collectively own, like a 7 or 8 story apartment complex. It's capable of housing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 families. Okay. Now, this 150 families is now a community in and of itself. These 150 families collectively own the apartment complex. And we can do the same thing without necessarily going in and buying an apartment complex from a previous organization or from a previous owner. We can actually say, you know what? We have 150 families who have the resources, who want to be able to do this. Yeah. And we can form a corporation, we can form a cooperative and just build the apartment complex from scratch, build the multi use. It's an option. It's definitely out there. Let's talk about some other issues. Okay. Housing. For those of you who've been following Idaho politics, one of the things we get, well, specifically Boise. Okay, we have Interfaith Sanctuary here in the state of Idaho. Interfaith Sanctuary runs a low threshold sanctuary in Boise City. Currently, they run a 24/7 operation that hosts, I think, upwards of about 100 people right now, and they've been trying to relocate to another location and build a facility that's actually capable of handling over 250 individuals, put them in near permanent housing. Okay, by near permanent, I don't mean setting them up with the intention of keeping them there. And that's not the goal of the shelter. That's not the goal of Interfaith Sanctuary. What the goal of Interfaith Sanctuary is to give them enough stability with enough access to services so that they can get themselves reestablished and re-entered into the community in a timely manner. And it's particularly interesting because right now, Interfaith Sanctuary did something that is essentially unheard of as far as shelters in the United States. And most of our shelters are actually run by religious organizations. So you have to go in and you have to sit through the sermon, and then you have to be shamed for being homeless and for being poor and for needing help. And then they'll let you sleep on a cot for 6 hours before they kick you out the next morning. Okay. It's not stabilizing. That's not helping the homeless. That's not fixing the problem. That is perpetuating the problem so that some holy roller can go in and feel good about how I helped the soup kitchen down it, and I made them sing prayers and mm, okay. Interfaith Sanctuary chose a different path. They chose a different route. And this was the low threshold, the 24/7 operation, so that they have service adjacent nonprofit organizations that are able to come in. They know where these homeless people are, so they can provide mental counseling. They can get them access to Terry Reid medical services so that they can get on appropriate medication in order to stabilize anything that's causing um, chemical imbalances. So they can get them into the right frame of mind to be able to get back on their own feet and into the community and into an apartment that they're paying for rather than continuing to exist in this homeless state. Okay. Um, Fantastic program. Curtis Steigers, I believe it's his wife, has been working on this program for close to 10 years. Uh, they've gone through an awful lot of growing pains in trying to establish this program and make this program work. This program does work. It does get people back into the community. It does help stabilize them. And the city of Boise recently came in and said, no, we don't want you helping the homeless in Boise. We don't want you building a better facility for the homeless in Boise. Okay. Um, Now, ironically, libertarian attitude about this, if it had been libertarians sitting on the zoning board, on the city planning board, and we're looking at this situation and going, well, one, Interfaith Sanctuary owns the property, owns the land, free and clear. Okay. They bought it with donations from private organizations, from private entities. No state funding, no federal funding, unlike so many others. All that, the land that they own is actually zoned as a shelter. Not that a libertarian would actually care what the land was zoned for, but in this case, it is zoned for a shelter. They do own it outright. There is no reason they shouldn't be able to continue with their plan to build a multi story shelter capable of housing upwards of 250 individuals until they are able to move out on their own and back into the community. If it had been a libertarian city planning board that had looked at that, yeah, go for it, man. Good on you. That's something the city doesn't have to pay for now. That's 200 families that are going to be, that's 200 people that are going to have shelter through the winter, that are going to be able to stay warm. And it's being handled by a nonprofit organization that is privately funded, no less. Voluntarism, folks, voluntarism. And the police wouldn't have to go around issuing certificates for a hotel room to homeless people living on the street when it's snowing outside, like it did last night, so that homeless people wouldn't freeze. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Reason why is because Idaho, Boise, Martin versus Boise. Okay, Martin versus Boise, that actually went to the Supreme Court, and it affected all of the Westerns. Well, it's affected all of the United States. And essentially, what it is, the Supreme Court said, you know, if there is not enough shelter space, there is not enough housing to accommodate the needs of the homeless people in a community, the police cannot arrest someone for vagrancy. There's no room at the shelter. The homeless can sleep in any public space they want, whether that's park, wherever, and they cannot be arrested. One of the considerations Boise did after taking a look at that was saying, you know what, if you're homeless and it's cold and there's no space, so that Boise doesn't get a reputation for freezing the homeless in the middle of winter, they will actually go around and hand them um, vouchers and go get a hotel room for the night so they don't freeze. Boise's paying for hotels in Boise. Go figure. Um, that's one of those things. If it had been a bunch of libertarians sitting on that zoning and planning commission discussing whether or not the interfaith sanctuary was allowed to build what they wanted to with their own money on their own land, construction on the new low threshold shelter in order to accommodate homeless individuals and get them reintegrated into the community would have been started 5 months ago. Instead, we're actually looking at an appeal process. Um, Current problem with construction costs. It is expensive to build houses. It is. The process of the purchases, the wood, what you need to do. The fact that right now, your ability to expand, build on your own house. You got 6% sales tax on uh, self repairs off of building, unless you got a contractor's license. It's going to cost you 6% in order to make, home improvements above and beyond. Yes, it's another one of the fun things about Idaho sales tax and our 6.5%. That same 6.5% that is applied to groceries, which Moyle doesn't want to repeal. Okay, no, he wants to give a 100 million a year tax break to people, but he doesn't want to actually give people that additional 6.5% purchasing power for buying groceries for their kids. Another topic, another time. We're still talking about housing. God, housing. Um, we've been losing alternative housing in the market for quite a while now. One of the things that has been, this is actually funny. One of the concepts for housing alternatives that comes up has been putting tiny houses in small community lots. Okay, this is, you get this built to spec tiny house which actually costs an exorbitant amount for what it is you're getting. And they've been marketing this to the new boomer, the millennials and stuff, saying, Spartan lifestyles, versatility, being able, you got the small space, you got your tiny home, this is yours. And here's this lot that we're going to let you put your tiny home onto. And trailer parks, you just reinvented trailer parks and gave it a new name and you rebranded it, but it's a trailer park. Um, KOA campground. And that's essentially what it is. Tiny houses are basically slightly less mobile RVs. That's the kind of specs that they're built to. Slightly less mobile RVs. But you can go in and you can set up a tiny home with somewhere in the neighborhood of about 600 to 800 square feet in the tiny home, be able to set up, have your own little spot in one of these camps. And it actually takes up less area than most of the RV camps here in the United States. It takes up less area than the RV parks. Um, but it takes some adjustment to the living style. Um, One of the things I grew up, or I shouldn't say grew up, uh, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 deployment to Iraq. One of the things that we came up with in the process, and we have industries built around this tiny home concept. Yes, tiny home concepts. All of the money that's been going into building tiny homes, all of the technology, all of the ability has been pioneered by the United States military in order to set up bases around the world. We call them containerized housing units. These containerized housing units are sweet. In less than 600 square feet, you got yourself a nice little double bunk bed. You got big screen TV against the wall. You got a bathroom with plumbing. And even got enough space that you can set up a little hot plate and a burner with the overhead. So that you got all of this in 600 square feet. Containerized housing units, folks. Gerdio Park, right now that space. City's looking at selling it. It's open space. Now, while I'm not necessarily advising that, because the reason why is because McGurdio Park was actually gifted to the city of Boise specifically for the creation of open space, green space, creation of a park. It is not the only place like that that exists within Boise city limits where there is green space where you can set up, 10, 20, 50 of these containerized housing units. It's an option, folks. It's illegal to do that because there's no place in the city of Boise or this county of Ada that is zoned to accept tiny houses. All of the grandfathered arrangements for the trailer parks, for the KOA parks, for the RV parks is quickly fading away. Transfer of ownership of those locations isn't going to anybody who wants to sustain those as trailer parks or as KOA RV parks. They are taking them and they're converting them into townhomes, luxury apartments, things that are running $1,400, $1,500 a month. The reason why is because affordable housing in the neighborhood of $700, $800 a month doesn't generate profit for property management organization. So again, this comes back to how much does it cost to build or create these affordable housing units where low-income workers, employees in the state of Idaho can actually afford to pay the rent while the property managers are able to make a profit. Regulations. So you'll talk to a bunch of union workers. Yeah. Union employees are looking, we overregulate. The ability to go in and create an apartment complex costs too much to make the housing actually affordable and for the property manager to be able to pay all of the things that are associated with maintaining the property and paying the mortgage at the same time. That's not to say that it can't be done, because it can be done. Uh, but it would be a lot easier if some of the costs associated with construction were actually removed so that the market could once again be competitive rather than belonging to three or four key developers here in the Treasure Valley. One of the other things that we look at, the fact that out of state companies, out of state corporations have actually been granted benefits for coming in and purchasing property, coming in and purchasing land. Out of state purchasers don't have to deal with certain things that in state, you know, you want to live in Idaho and buy land, the rules are a little different than if you don't live in Idaho and want to buy land. We see an awful lot of our property management companies right now are actually owned by out of state corporations. How does the money stay in a community if the rent seekers are taking all of the money out of state? Okay, yeah, that's not one of my libertarian platforms, folks. That's actually one of those things I happen to disagree with a significant amount. Reason why is because an awful lot of that money that's coming in from out of state that is buying up in-state property, um, it was ill-gotten gains, folks. A lot of those corporations have received benefits. They've been associated with BlackRock. They've received money from the feds that they didn't deserve, and they're using it to generate loans and mortgages on property and pricing out local owners. That aspect of it is libertarian. And the Fed and a lot of these land grabs that are being funded by funny bookkeeping will go away. You'll see the market crash, but that's actually a market correction. Reason why is because the cost of housing in the valley in Idaho is inflated because of the way the money's been moved and the way the money has gone to specific organizations illegally, unethically, and inappropriately. Government money is paying corporations to steal our land. Fix that problem, and people will actually be able to start affording homes again. Um, so that's my complaint on that aspect of the current land grab that's going on, particularly corporate ownership of land, absentee ownership of land. Bill Gates buying massive quantities of farmland with money that was gifted to him by the United States government. Uh, yeah, you can do better than that, folks. There's no reason one person should own that much land. There's no reason one corporation should own land in absentia. You know, sell it to the cooperatives, sell it to locally owned corporations, sell it to the people who live in the homes before you sell it out of state. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. I do know why Idaho legislators love to make sure big money has first access to land and property and some of the cheapest labor in the United States. We know why. Take a look. What else have I talked about? I've talked about the auxiliary dwelling units. That's the ability to go in and build a um, grandmother's apartment or a mother's apartment, on a home that's already owned. Being able to allow tiny homes and or RVs to park and live on properties that are owned by other people. We've talked about being able to build larger homes so that you have multi generations living within a home, so that you can consolidate family, which also works on consolidating childcare. We have those options that we are seeing more and more people participate in. We're seeing more in the way of alternative living styles where you see this one's funny. This one's going to drive an awful lot of people in Idaho in particular crazy. Okay. The idea of a poly household where you have several people, you know, three, four, five, six adults, all sexually active with each other, living in the same house, collectively paying the bills, collectively raising the children. It does happen. It does work. It does exist. Am I advocating for it? No. But you do you. Pay attention to the things that make you happy. If that's something that works for you, there's no reason your neighbors should be able to prevent you from doing it. That also makes sure that everybody has a house to live in. They have a roof over their head. They have a bed to sleep in, even if they're sharing the bed with two or three other. Anyway, I, yeah, some heads are going to explode over that one. But the thing is, uh, there are families like that that exist, and they do work, and they're happy. Uh, and we still have laws on the book that make that kind of polyromantic relationship illegal. Uh, yeah, we still have anti-polygamy laws. Mm, yeah. What happens between consenting adults should be left between consenting adults. Uh, kind of moralism that prevents families from being able to function that way, particularly in this economy, is just continuing perpetuation of privilege, folks. Give people the opportunity to live the way they want to live. You'll see more houses, you'll see more relationships develop. It seem weird to a lot of us initially. Um, let it happen, particularly as we're moving into an era where, yes, we have fewer and fewer people who are having children. Ironically, 2021, we saw fewer people being born than we saw die in the United States. So, like, for the first time in forever, we saw a decline in the population of the United States over the last 2 years. Not growth, decline. Fewer people being born than are dying. A lot of that has to do with economic pressures. As long as we continue to allow corporations to grab the land so that people don't have the ability to establish ownership, own property, own land. The right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, to own property, to own land in such a way so that they can acquire generational wealth. We've been actively denying that here in the United States. That is one of the things about the libertarian platform. We are not pro corporate because the corporations have proven that they can't manage themselves. They can't manage their properties in sustainable ways. They cannot manage their lands in sustainable ways. We really need to start doing the decentralization, allowing the communities to continue to build up and create uh, their own land use policies that are sustainable. Oh God, what else are we looking at? Cooperative home ownership. Look at that. What else? Come on, folks. I know some of you have been watching me for damn near an hour now. You've been watching me be my lovely little ray of sunshine. Yes. And I have yet to see a single comment. Talk to me, folks. Talk to me. Um, what other options do we got besides deregulating the building industry so that market competition can once again be part of the housing solution? What can we do about going into the federal government and saying, you know what? That law that says the housing authority can't build more houses, maybe cities should be able to build houses within their community for the low income workers. Maybe that is something that a community should be able to allow to happen. When the city builds a complex and then rents to own the apartment complex their family moves into. Yeah, for all my ancoms out there, all my anarcho communists, there's a "Hmm, the commune, the decentralized commune. Yes. Um, no, there are solutions out there. They don't need to be stuck in a particular situation. Um, what else do we got? Um, I'm starting to run out of ideas here, folks. So we got the federal block to communities being able to help. We have the problem with planning and zoning boards that continue to block independent operators, independent corporations that are not part of the development process, not part of the local developer organizations that have been allowed to exist and perpetuate and say, you know what, uh, these three companies, we got an oligopoly on development here in the Treasure Valley. Okay. These are the only three companies that are allowed to develop anything in the Treasure Valley. You want to get a house in the suburbs. You're going to be buying from one of three companies that has purchased and developed the land and installed the homeowners association. So that not only are you continuing to pay property taxes on the property, you're continuing to pay the homeowners association, which is owned, managed, and run by the development corporation that you signed up a contract with when you bought the property in that suburb. So even then, it's still not your home. The development company still owns your home via the homeowners association. Bring back private ownership. Get out of the homeowners. Stop allowing the state to create a situation where developers can continue to perpetually own your home that you bought from them with your mortgage. I, I don't know how we allowed it to reach this point. I really don't. You know, I look at what goes on with the housing market here in the Treasure Valley. I look at what goes on with the housing market in Idaho. Um, And I wonder, how did we allow this level of graft to occur in Idaho in association with owning a plot of land you can grow your own food on? What happened? We know what happened, and we can roll it back and create a situation that allows people who want to live the urban life to live the urban life. We can set up those communities that allow them to do the virtual, that do the vertical gardens in their high-rise complexes, where you have a community of 150 families living in the same high-rise building. Okay, we can set up suburbs where you have those 150 families living within walking distance of a convenience store, grocery store, a drugstore. Um, we have the ability to set up those situations so that every type of cultural lifestyle that's been developed over the past 75 years, urban, mixed use facilities, suburban, mixed use communities, rural, where we still have families that grow the food for the rest of the nation, allow each one of those cultures to develop and operate independently. That is something that we've actually lost here in the state of Idaho, provided we ever had it. We didn't. We never had it. Our legislators come from all over the state. Okay, some of these legislators live in towns with 200 people in them. They have come to Boise and they have decided that they are going to tell Boise how to run the city from the state house. It's one of the problems we've had with housing development here is we have people who don't understand city life, defining how city life is to develop and occur in the city, and they've created bad policy as a result. Why somebody who lives in a community of 200 people wants to come to Boise and tell Boise how to run the city is one of the reasons we continue to have problems with housing, the job market, and several other things. So when it comes time when you see your legislators going, why are you regulating how Boise does Boise? You don't understand Boise. Why are you regulating it? You still continue to see that. We can continue to see that problem, interfaith sanctuary again, you know, um, we have people in the state house that are part of the reason why, you know, uh, that political snafu continues to develop in association with that. Local lenders, local banks, local credit unions. I mean, here's an idea: get together 50 people, get together 50 families, and then go down to the Idaho Central Credit Union and say, together, we would like to build an apartment complex. We want to form a corporation that is owned wholly by Idaho residents who want to live in the building that we want to buy. So we want to build, and we want it purpose built for multi use. Yeah. Final thought. Um, okay. This one's of particular interest. Reason why is because it's been a continuing problem in Idaho for well on 50 years now. Okay, Idaho has the tank farm. Yes, we have a tank farm. This tank farm is interesting because it actually falls into 3 or 4 federal assistance categories. But Joe, what are you doing talking about federal benefits, in order to improve this land? And these federal benefits have been in existence for nearly 50 years with regards to this specific land, and nobody has gone in and taken advantage of that in the last 50 years. And part of it is I know why it's expensive. What I see should be done with it isn't exactly a cheap process, even with federal assistance going in to help with the program. But the tank farm, it's a super fund. It's a super fund site. Okay. The United States government has promised funds to go in and detox the land because of the amount of oil and gas that is seeped into the land. It's a super fund site. It's an economic zone. Okay. And I think there's like 2 or 3 different free economic zone, and like 1 or 2 other classifications for that zone. And that is so you can go in and you can do business tax free. It is so you can go in and create buildings, create jobs in that area, be able to go in and clean up the land. Now, currently, it's owned by an oil company, gas company, because we still have the tanks there, even though the tanks, they've been there, 50 years, and they continue to leak and seep into the ground. But it is within an organizational capacity to go in and move the tank farm. There's actually land outside of Boise. It's non-arable. It's desert land. It's not that far away, so it's still close enough. So the transportation costs with getting the oil and gas from that location into Boise and surrounding areas is reasonably inexpensive. It'll also cut down on the gas trucks to get off the Orchard exit, bring up a significant amount of traffic. Um, and there have actually been a couple independent developers, not the ones that city council's approved of, um, you know, uh, that have gone in and said, "We have a plan. We have a plan for the land in the tank farm. All we need is city planning and zoning to let us do it. Let us buy the property. Let us clean it up. Let us build what we want to build." That's it. Really, the only thing stopping them is city planning and zoning, saying, "Yeah, we don't want you doing that there, because if you do that there, it adversely affects the profits of some of our friends." Talk to your city leaders, talk to your legislators. Tell your legislators, hands off, boys. You talk to your city leaders. Time to start looking out for the residents of Boise. Or eventually, we're going to end up in the same situation as all those Californians who are complaining about all the crap on the street in San Francisco. Is if we don't fix the housing problem, if we don't fix the developing homeless crisis in the Treasure Valley in a positive way, if we do not look at taking advantage of some of these solid solutions, because a bunch of people who hated it in California decided to move here and have told us that we have to do it the way they did it in California because they don't want us doing it differently than they did it there. Yeah. certain amount of cognitive dissonance with regards to our immigrants. Not saying they're all bad, but seriously, folks, you left California for a reason. California wasn't doing right by you. You came to Idaho. So when you come to Idaho and tell Idaho that we need to do it the California way, do not be surprised when Idahoans tell you to go fuck yourself. We don't need it, man. We do not need you bringing California rules to Idaho. We have a way of doing things. It's compassionate. It's considerate. Stop coming here, driving up profits for California-owned corporations that are buying up our land. It's not a good look, folks. It's not a good look. Okay, I've been on for 70 minutes, folks. It's been nice talking to you. I don't know what you guys are going to do with this. Yeah, I meandered a little bit longer than I wanted to. Some of my topics were a little bit slower. Um, Join me, folks. Talk with me. Conversation. I love listening to the chat. I love reacting to the chat. I love getting your questions. I want to hear what you guys are concerned about. It's too late at this point because I'm about to sign off. But remember, the feds shouldn't be controlling what's happening in Boise. Idaho State Legislature shouldn't be controlling what's happening in Boise. Boiseans decide what happens in Boise. It's the way you build community, folks. You don't let strangers tell you how to do business. You don't let people who don't understand the business tell you how to do the business. Didn't work then, doesn't work now, never going to work in the future. Anyway, take care of yourself. Remember, folks, family, friends, community. Community, family, friends, community. As long as you got those three, you can make anything happen. So I'm going to catch you on the flip side. Remember, look out for my shows on KRTD Media on Wednesdays. Join me for my Kind Idaho broadcast on Thursdays. Join me Friday night for your cup of Joe with this ray of sunshine. Peace.